Given the short time frame, it is absolutely difficult to compress very comprehensive and complex topics like this too. But the good news is that the previous speakers last week and yesterday did an excellent job to provide a lot of background to some of the things that I'll be discussing today, which means that in some of the slides that you will see, I will have to flip them through because we have already discussed those things in the past. So this is a brief synopsis of what I plan to discuss today. There are some confusing concepts, so I just want to put them in perspective to help especially the non-technical people to get a better understanding. Then I'll look at why we are so worried about this particular issue, nuclear and radiological terrorism. But I want to emphasize that the red highlight is a focus on what HEU minimization is about, which means I'll be focusing on highly enriched uranium, more than 20% with composition of uranium-235. So the next item, which is important here, is other radioactive material. Primarily, this refers to ionizing radiation sources, which are mainly cesium-137, strontium-90, iridium-192, cobalt-60, and radium-226. These are sources that are widely used across the world, not just in Africa, in agriculture, in industry, in medicine. And that's why it becomes a topic of interest for us to look at. So I think I had provided a brief overview, so I'm going to skip that. The next thing which I just wanted to highlight was the fact that the issues we're talking here are global issues. They have been highlighted by President Obama. They have been highlighted by former Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Dr. Mohammed El-Baradei, in 2009. They have been highlighted by President W. Bush. They've also been highlighted by other senior prominent persons in this field. One other striking thing to note is that for the first time, possibly in sub-Saharan Africa, the president of Nigeria included radiological security in their national security strategy, which highlights the importance and the threat that the country is facing from both radiological activities. There's no gainsaying to state that Africa has become one of the hotbed of terrorist activities in the world. When you look at the map from north to south, east to west, and even at the center middle of Africa, we have terror activities, terror groups spreading out every year, and the number seems to be rising without hope of stopping in the near future. Outside of terror groups, we are also experiencing an increase in the number of civil wars and conflicts in Africa. What this means is that it creates an unstable environment and also enable black market that can allow even terrorist groups to acquire materials that might be difficult because regulators find it difficult to work within such an environment. So let's take a look at why we are so concerned about this topic. I mean, there will be some critics who will say, but we don't have nuclear power in Africa, so why are we concerned with nuclear terrorism? Why are we concerned with radiological terrorism? So I just want to highlight one incident that we may all be familiar with, and that was the incident in South Africa, the Pearl Endeavour facility, where a team of people break into the facility and spend almost 45 minutes. This demonstrates that despite the security that is in place, it is not enough, and we still need to do more to ensure that we never fall victim to such a malicious incident again. Another case that I'd like to highlight is the one of Congo, which has been mentioned over and over. Particularly, Congo was the first country to host a research reactor in the continent of Africa way back in 1965. But in the 70s, two of the fuel rods got missing. One was recovered, one has never been recovered. But what is very interesting about the Congo case is that a sting operation was conducted in 1998, in which someone in the Middle East was apprehended, was arrested, who was actually coming to buy the high enriched uranium fuel. And that was estimated to cost some 12.6 million US dollars. So these things are not therefore theoretical. They are not like Hollywood movie, but they are realities that we are facing, and that like international community, we have to take the concrete steps to ensure that we never get into a worst case scenario. So what is the observation? The observation is that despite inspections and safeguards, IAEA could not prevent the loss of reactor fuel. It also indicates that effective controls on nuclear weapons, material, and expertise greatly reduce the opportunities for terrorists. And this is where HEU minimization policy comes in. Well, what is it in the first place? In some basic terms, it is simply a scientific approach to the resolution of a political issue. And the goal of HEU minimization is to reduce the possibility of nuclear proliferation and terrorism by replacing HEU with low-enriched uranium in civil applications, downblending highly enriched uranium to low-enriched uranium, or developing replacement technology, not relying on high-enriched uranium, so as to render future new civil uses of HEU unnecessary. Therefore, this is where a lot of the work in Africa has been focused on, trying to phase out HEU in favor of LEU. And there are 4 countries that have been successful in this effort: Ghana, Libya, Nigeria, and South Africa. South Africa is one of the leading producers of medical isotope, molybdenum-99, and their Safari reactor was using high-enriched uranium. As part of the HEU process, this was converted into LEU, and the first molybdenum was supplied to the United States back in 2007. So the next country that was in this process that has also converted their research reactor is the case of Libya. Unlike South Africa, Libya's situation was a dismantlement process in which a Russian-built 10 megawatt pool-type research reactor, cooled and moderated by light water, that started operation in 1981, was unilaterally given up by then President Gaddafi. And this was part of the WMD weapons dismantlement program. And it started in 2003. In 2004, items were removed under US-UK-Libya joint operation under IAEA supervision. In 2004, 17 kilograms of fresh HEU fuel were shipped back to Russia. In 2005, the HEU-LEU conversion study started. In 2006, IAEA provided assistance. In 2006, again, 3 kilograms of fresh HEU were returned to Russia again for the second time. Then in 2007, IAEA installed training support. And in 2009, the final shipment of 20 kilograms of high-enriched uranium were returned to Russia. So what this means is that at least South Africa and Libya, in principle, are completely free of HEU in civilian applications. So the next country in the line is Ghana. Ghana and Nigeria are 2 countries that run miniature neutron source reactors in the continent of Africa, which are designed and supplied by China. They were initially running on 90% HEU, which is approximately 1 kilogram. So the initial process in Ghana began in 2014. In 2006, there was a joint study between Ghana and Nigeria. By 2011, a working group was established. In 2012, they completed safety analysis report, and in 2017, the core was completely converted to LEU fuel, and HEU was repatriated to China. But there were some challenges in the case of Ghana, which I think were good because Nigeria could learn from those challenges and to speed up the process. So part of them were political, others were technical, and others were economical. So in the conversion facility, I think there was a need to increase the power level by 13% to match the original HEU core flux, which is more technical, and I think this was corrected in the context of Nigeria. So I have some images, unfortunately you can't see them, but you will have the slide and you'll be able to see everything. So in the case of Nigeria, which is the last country, I mean, they completed conversion back in 2018, which therefore means that Nigeria and Ghana became the first two countries outside of China to successfully convert their research reactor core and target to LEU, which I think is a significant progress, and that also demonstrates Africa's commitment to HEU minimization. So the next thing that I want to briefly talk about is high activity SEER radioactive sources. This is going to be a little bit faster because most of the items have been discussed by previous speakers, so I won't dwell on that. I just want to highlight that the fact of the matter is that radioactive sources are widely used across Africa in agriculture, industry, transport, medicine, construction, mining, and research. But I'm going to focus on the medical part of it, which means I'm going to exclude, it's a very big, broad topic that we can compare within this conversation. I've already highlighted that we have threats in Africa from terrorist groups. I've also highlighted that there are vulnerabilities. That is, regulations are missing in some countries, some are weak. We have some weak governance systems that create loopholes that black market and exploit. And when we have a situation whereby you have material that is of valuable to a terrorist group and the terrorist group has significant intent, then that can trigger action to acquire that item or that material. So that kind of creates a bigger problem, which I describe as a health security nexus, which is at the intersection of radiological security and cancer treatment or public health in Africa. And why is this a problem? It is a problem because projection shows that by 2030, there will be a significant increase in the number of cancer cases in the continent of Africa. It therefore means that if government in Africa needs to take action to increase access to radiotherapy services, it means that there will be more hotspots in the region or more facilities that are valuable targets to terror groups or black market or armed merchants. So the purpose of HEU minimization is to encourage states to see where it is economically and technically feasible to adopt alternative technologies rather than adopting cobalt-60 machines or machines that rely on high activity SEER sources. I actually have a slide with a variety, a listing of applications where we have rad sources and alternatives that do exist today. So I move forward, but there are some opportunities that exist both in the public health, radiological security, and global peace. And this is where it becomes multifaceted and requires a collective and a comprehensive approach, whereby we have societies and academia and international governmental organizations have to come together. We also need agencies and public health organizations. We need industry and we need NGOs to work together because there's no single solution to the problem that we are facing. But I also have a slide that is from the IAEA, which actually depicts the need of member states in the continent. When you look through the slide, you're going to see that in greater need. At the top of it, there's a greater need for legislative and regulatory framework, and that is the basis of regulating all these sources. Like Dr. Simon earlier said, if there's no regulation in the country, then it becomes difficult for regulatory officers and inspectors to perform their job or to do their duty. So what is the IAEA doing in this regard to help the situation? They conduct awareness raising and sensitization workshops on the threat of nuclear and radiological terrorism. They establish or improve nuclear security architecture in member states in Africa. They also help to build capacity of member states to detect illicit movement of radiological sources. And they also help countries to improve their nuclear security culture. So in summary, what I want us to take away from this conversation is that both nuclear and radiological security are a global threat. It is real. Ideal security means that there are no targets. So if there are no HEU sources, HEU material. If there are no cobalt sources, no high activity silt sources, if there are no vulnerabilities, then that will actually raise the bar for any non-state actor to acquire them. So the second takeaway is that HEU to LEU conversion actually helps to remove the target, which is the ingredient that the non-state actors are looking for. And finally, alternatives to high activity silt sources actually helps to improve peace and at the same time enhance the peaceful use of radiological sources in the continent. So my takeaway with you is that nuclear radioterrorism is a global threat that requires global action. And thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this wonderful seminar. I'm going to be focusing on issues of biological security. So we'll move over to the realm of safely dealing with biological materials. While I'm presenting, I'm going to turn off my video because I see a note that my internet is a bit unstable. So I want to make sure that I don't use up any unnecessary bandwidth, and I'll come back to you at the end. So our organization is the International Federation of Biosafety Associations. We are an international not-for-profit, non-governmental organization. We have a number of member associations across Africa. These are national biosafety associations. And we also work very closely with other observer organizations from within Africa, including the African Society for Laboratory Medicine, the Africa Center for Disease Control, and others as well. And collectively, our mission is really safe, secure, and responsible work with biological materials. And we do this work across the continent, in Africa and globally, in partnership with many other organizations. We address all the way through to deliberate misuse of biological agents and acts of bioterrorism. And that's where I'm going to focus today, on some of the activities that we're involved in with respect to biological security. So our goal at the IFBA is to ensure that we can secure biological materials and technology not be misused to produce malicious uses. So we collaborate very closely with the BWC Implementation Support Unit and the UN Office of Disarmament Affairs in Geneva, trying to assist efforts to build capacity and support member states in implementing the convention and also implementing UN Security Council Resolution 1540. We participate in the meetings of the state parties, and we also offer various side events at those meetings related to biological security issues. We also try to produce best practices and guidelines, training tools, and workshops that look at all different aspects of biological security. This is one example of an online training tool that was developed in collaboration with Canada's Global Affairs Canada program. It looks at incident response, physical biosecurity measures, pathogen accountability, personnel reliability, and all of the different elements associated with securing biological materials. And on our website, you can access these training materials, guidelines, best practices related to biological security. Now, we know that securing biological materials really presents a lot of unique challenges. These materials are present in many, many different types of laboratories, a lot of which are accessible to the public. For example, hospital laboratories, university laboratories. There's also a highly changing workforce, students coming in and out of their laboratories, visiting scientists. And these materials are present all over the laboratory at any particular time. They could be in the incubators, they could be in freezers, they could be in the waste streams, or if you're working with animals. We also know that pathogens can replicate, and therefore you only need a very minute quantity to be significant. There's no mechanism to detect when pathogens are being removed from that facility, and they're quite easily hidden and taken out of these facilities. So it's also not feasible to really track the quantities you have in your laboratory because this varies over time during an experiment. So that again makes it difficult to know if some component of that was actually taken and if anything is missing. And what this really comes down to is that physical security measures using guards and gates and other types of physical security infrastructure is not really sufficient for securing biological materials. It's highly dependent on the integrity of the individuals who have access to those pathogens. Enhancing that culture of accountability and responsibility amongst all of the individuals going out and in and out of those labs will reduce biosecurity risks. We also know that leadership at the institution or at the laboratory is a key element in biosecurity. We really need leadership to enhance this culture of integrity and responsibility and foster biosecurity. So what we're really looking at in terms of securing biological materials is the human element and ensuring that we have good culture of integrity and responsibility in all those working in and around biological materials. Another component is looking at what we're calling a graded approach to biological securities based on the relative risk of the loss of that material. So not all biological materials need the same level of protection depending on the severity of the biological agent that you're talking about. And all locations don't need the same level of protection. So entry areas, sample receipt areas may be different from where you're culturing and storing your pathogens. We really need to start with a risk assessment to identify and prioritize all of the biological agents in a particular facility and analyze the specific risk of those agents. Are any of these of interest to bioterrorists? How could somebody gain access to my freezers? And how would I know if any pathogens were missing? There are many, many questions to go through in conducting a risk assessment. And I've given you a link here to the Canadian Biosafety Guideline on conducting a biosecurity risk assessment. It's available in French and English, and it walks you through the entire process of conducting this risk assessment in order to determine what biological security measures are needed at that specific location. Let's talk a little bit now about the COVID-19 pandemic and biological security. We're working very closely with all of our members on the ground in Africa and around the world in looking at the issues of biological security. We know there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of infection control and biosafety, but what about the issues of biological security during a pandemic? Is there an increased threat from someone with malicious intent during a COVID-19 pandemic, for example? The Global Health Security Agenda, APP3, which is the Action Package Prevent 3 on biosafety, did indeed say that biosecurity practices are not fully addressed in the current response. And in particular, guidance is needed to ensure appropriate sample destruction after diagnostics have been carried out, to avoid having orphaned biological samples spread across a multitude of unsafe and unsecure facilities. So what are the biological security threats during a disease outbreak? It could be an outsider threat, which is somebody who is opportunistic by stealing readily available pathogens from these poorly secured locations where samples are being taken. Or it could be an insider threat. We're rapidly scaling up human resources for individuals to be taking samples, processing these samples, and we're really focusing on diagnostic expertise of these individuals and not necessarily background checks. Now, we think the likelihood, of course, is low, but it's not something that can be ignored. There have been a few reports of incidents, for example, during the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. There was a taxi that was hijacked and samples were taken. These were Ebola samples being transported in the taxi. It's assumed that they were looking for other valuables, not these samples. We don't know what happened to the samples. There was another similar incident during the COVID pandemic in South Africa. We don't know the intent there. We think the likelihood is low, but it's not something we can ignore. So what can we do during a disease outbreak? We need to understand that it's a very complex response. Our infection control practices need to be really thought of at first, and we don't want to create any unnecessary burden to healthcare professionals in terms of biosecurity that may increase their risks of catching these infectious diseases that they're working with. But what we can do is increase awareness among frontline workers. Ensure that everyone working in the response understands that the outbreak could create a circumstance where individuals with malicious intent want to have access to these materials. Ensure that they know who to report any suspicious behavior or suspicious individuals that they see around patient centers, sample receiving areas, laboratories. Try as best as possible to restrict access to these areas and move the samples from the collection areas to the laboratories as soon as possible. Know who you're giving the samples to and that there's a chain of custody of sign-off of samples as they're being transferred from the field to the various laboratories. And most importantly, making sure that we're not having any orphan samples left over after the pandemic. This was a situation that was encountered in the wake of the recent West African Ebola outbreak, where there was a multitude of Ebola samples unaccounted for or in unsecure facilities spread across many different countries in West Africa. So we want to make sure that all samples are either destroyed if they're no longer needed or stored in secure areas following the disease outbreak. Now, one of the programs I wanted to speak to you a little bit about is the IFBA's professional certification program. We're supporting capacity development of individuals in this field of biological security. So we have an independent assessment program of an individual's competency in a number of different areas related to managing biological risks. And one of these professional certifications is specifically in biological security. This is a program that requires an ongoing recertification every 5 years to ensure that individuals maintain their competency and continuing education throughout their career. For the biosecurity certification, we're assessing an individual's knowledge in 6 key areas. Conventions, guidelines, and standards related to biosecurity, how to conduct these risk assessments that I talked about, physical biosecurity measures, pathogen accountability, personnel reliability, and the issues of dual use and bioethics. And our professional certification is an examination. Questions are situational and they require individuals to select from a number of different options and choose the best situation or the best answer in response to that particular question. So we're really assessing application of knowledge and ensuring that people can go through each scenario, use critical thinking skills, and select the best choice for that particular question. To date, we have 800 certified professionals around the world, and you can see many of them are indeed in Africa. We've issued 100 113 professional certifications, specifically in the field of biosecurity. And if you go to our website, you'll be able to see the directory of certified professionals listed by country, and you'll be able to find individuals within your countries who have achieved their certification and demonstrated competency in this area. We've also asked our certified professionals, what difference does it make? Why should I become professionally certified in this area of biological security? And individuals really said that there is a positive impact. They have a more in-depth understanding of how to implement best practices in biosecurity. They're given enhanced responsibilities at their workplace for biosecurity. And they themselves have greater confidence and a commitment to ensure that pathogens and biological materials are well secured in their own institutions and facilities. Individuals also told us that they were more prepared when the COVID pandemic hit us last year. They really knew how to apply the knowledge that they had learned in terms of biosecurity concepts in a practical application when the COVID-19 pandemic started. Complementary to our professional certification program is a mentoring program that we have. It's a south-to-south peer mentoring program where our certified professionals are mentoring young scientists in their own countries or in their own regions. Right now we have 68 participants from 28 countries, including in Africa. And we're trying to build this capacity through this mentoring program between our certified professionals and young scientists. Each month, they participate in different discussion topics and webinars together with guest speakers on a number of different topics related to biosafety and biosecurity. And then finally, I wanted to make you aware of our IFBA online community portal. It's where the international community can come together and discuss issues related to biosafety and biosecurity. We have a number of different working groups that are focusing on different topics, from biosecurity diplomacy to COVID-19, and many other different topics. So you're quite welcome to have a look at that and join us in the international online discussion platform as well. So with that, I'll hand it back over to the moderator.
Thank you so much, Maureen, for that really informative presentation. It was also terrifying to know some of the threats, especially in the backdrop of the global pandemic and the concerns about biosecurity safety. With that, I would encourage our participants to send their questions in the chat box, and we'll look forward to getting them on board to engage and ask their questions to our panelists. But I would first start off with my question to both Hubert and Maureen. Maureen, you spoke about the fact that in your assessment, the idea of physical security measures is probably not enough, and you mentioned that there is a need for incorporating and cultivating a culture of and enhancing a culture of responsibility. I wanted to understand, but this idea of cultivating this culture of responsibility probably would vary from country to country, and I'm interested to know what are some of the global standards which essentially countries can probably adopt to ensure this culture of responsibility. And saying that, I also wanted to really say that it is amazing to note that there are so many peer mentoring and professional certification programs. Would you also be please be so kind to maybe link some of them in the chat box, because I'm sure a lot of emerging professionals and experts in this group would be interested to know more about that from you. And turning to Hubert, One of the core themes in your presentation that really came out so finely was the threat of non-state actors, and in your presentation you underscored the point that the conversion from HEU to LEU has been an important the part of downblending has been an important aspect of non-proliferation efforts. I would like to understand from you that this process of down blending, which essentially is really aimed at minimizing the threats from non-state actor, does it also help promote a culture of nuclear security cooperation with like-minded countries and strategic partners? So over to you, Maureen, and then maybe we can come to Hubert for your remarks.
Thank you very much. Yes, with respect to physical security for securing biological materials, we're really looking to try and deter and delay people from gaining access to those materials through the use of physical security. So if someone were to see a camera, for example, pointing at the front of the building, that might be a deterrent to them. And by providing graded access, locked doors as you go from the entry through to the laboratory areas, you're trying to delay people. But as I said, if someone wants to remove materials from the laboratory and they are able to gain access, it really does come down to that sense of a culture of responsibility of individuals with access to those materials. So what we're trying to do is to build up this sense of community, our community of individuals working with those materials, ensuring that leadership is on board and making sure that people working in laboratories have a say in the development of their standard operating procedures for biosafety and biosecurity. It's really a team effort in each facility handling these materials. And that it's not just about a personal reliability or background check on a particular individual. It's more about how do we nurture that relationship with each individual working in the laboratory, involving them in these mentorship programs, supporting them in obtaining their professional certification, such that they can have the confidence in the biosecurity issues that they're dealing with, having them participate in our biological safety associations and networks, and really having a sense of community in issues related to biosecurity. And I'd be happy to type in the links to that program, those programs in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your response. I really appreciate it. Hubert, over to you.
Yes, I think your question was related to down blending. Just to put it into perspective, down blending is simply a proven method for rendering highly enriched uranium unusable by terrorists. And how it is carried out. This is done by mixing both HEU with LEU. In such a scenario, the product of that mixture becomes unusable and thus not harmful to the environment and to the human to humans. But I think the context of Africa, with the exception of South Africa, that still has stockpiles of HEU, the entire continent has been rid of highly enriched uranium, especially those countries that were running their research reactors, as I did presented in my slide. So it would be a very useful culture, not just a benefit of non-proliferation or either nuclear security, but kind of evolving and changing the paradigm, the language from HEU minimization to HEU elimination. So overall, I think it is much more significant for countries that still have large stocks of HEU, like the United States, like Russia, where this can become a practical and a very useful tool in helping to enable peace in the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would like to call upon our audience members who have been very engaged. Is it possible to get Nana Abdul Malik on board to ask so that he could ask his question maybe?
Yes, I promoted Nana to the, she's a panelist now.
Oh, thank you, Margarita.
Hello. Hello. Can you hear me? Yeah. Hi.
I can hear you. Go ahead, ask your question, please.
Yes, my question goes to Hubert. I wanted to know, as regards the regulatory board or authorities, how long does it actually take for them to give license to operation of nuclear facilities after the conversion has taken place, say from the HEU to the LEU? How long does it take? And then what are the criteria they follow in making sure that the facility is ready to function properly and then is ready to commence operation to its fullest? Thank you.
Okay. Can I go ahead, Sylvia?
Yes, please.
Yeah, that is a very great question with a lot of technicalities and at the same time politics that are involved in it. To better respond to it, I will just try to outline the steps that goes through HEU to LEU conversion. That way it gives you a bigger picture and a sense of understanding how both safety and security issues licensing are being addressed in that process. So the first step in the conversion process is negotiation by decision makers and the reactor operators to initiate the conversion process. And this is normally followed by a political decision to consider reactor conversion. When that decision has been made, which is at the highest level of the country, then you now move into a more technical aspect, which is a feasibility study to assess whether the conversion is possible. The fact that there is a need to enhance security by phasing out HEU, but this is like I earlier mentioned in my presentation, this is a scientific solution to a political issue. So now the country has to undergo or conduct a feasibility study. And I did mention in my presentation, it started with Nigeria and Ghana at the same time through an IEA coordinated research project and with different partners coming to provide external expertise in that process. Once a feasibility study has been assessed, the next step is to go into an official decision to convert. The government now has the required information to make the decision whether they should convert that research reactor or not. A number of factors come into play. If, for example, in the case of South Africa, it is used for producing radioisotopes, is that going to impact the production quality and quantity of radioisotope? These are economic factors that the facility will have to consider and the government too will have to consider. The next step, which is almost like the fourth one, is to carry out a complete detailed operation and safety analysis for licensing. And this is where the regulators come in. Based on the based on the feasibility study, then they can now carry out the operation and safety analysis report to see if it is feasible. Then you now have to go through the regulatory review of the conversion. Once this has been done, if there are some questions that comes from the regulator, then the operator will have to respond back and forth. So just to note that in the case of Ghana and Nigeria, it took almost about 20 years to complete the process because of this back and forth and studies that have to be conducted. And once these questions have been addressed, then now the authority will now make a decision to grant a license to convert that reactor. And once it is done, then you have the rest of the issues now is going back to business as usual with fuel procurement and then the conversion process and so forth. So yes, all these things are taken into consideration. It would depend, the time frame will depend how the operator is providing feedback to the regulator and how the regulator is processing and moving back and forth. I would also like to note, just for the sake of the conversation, that in the case of Africa, Ghana and Nigeria were actually the first countries outside of China, and these are the only countries that operate these machines in Africa. So there was no precedence. So there was a lot of learning along the way, and this this involved both from the Chinese, from the IA, from the US, and from the UK. So, but I do believe, and as a result of that, the facility in Ghana that was at the foundation of this conversion process is now serving as a training facility for other countries around the world because of the extensive expertise and lessons that they acquired in the course of this conversion process. I hope that responds to your question.
Yes, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Foy. It is really fascinating to know that in Ghana there is going to be a training facility, and as you mentioned, like of course with the deep knowledge and expertise gathered during over the course of these years, I think that is a really important development. I would turn to Maureen, and we have a lot of questions coming in, and one of the questions that was stated was, are you working with the government agencies to enforce some of the guidelines? You very rightfully mentioned in your remarks the efforts to deter and delay. So would like to hear your thoughts on that. And simultaneously, as you are speaking, I would like to call on Nisreen and also Linda. Nisreen had a really good question on cyber attacks. And Linda had an important question on personal negligence, and if they could be pulled on board and ask their questions, that would be great. Over to you, Maureen.
Yes, we do have a program or a project that we started last year that's going in full force right now, and it's called Avoiding the Implementation Gap in Biosecurity. Now, this is where national authorities and policymakers have developed biosecurity legislation, guidelines or standards that are often difficult to practically implement on the front lines of any response or in the laboratories. So we're really trying to connect frontline practitioners, laboratory professionals, healthcare professionals with policymakers and national authorities, such that the development of biosecurity guidelines, legislation in any country is done collaboratively at both levels, top down and bottom up, to make sure that what is developed is meeting the needs of the country, but it also can be sustained in a cost-effective and practical manner on the front lines. As an example, the Africa Center for Disease Control has a new biosafety and biosecurity initiative, and they're working through their regional collaborating centers in each region. The meeting of the West Africa Regional Collaborating Center was this morning with Africa CDC and all of the national health authorities in those countries. And they are developing a framework for biosafety and biosecurity legislation. And this framework is being developed by people working on the front lines with biological materials, people in universities, people in the ministries as well, all coming together to develop this comprehensive framework that can be practically implemented and sustained over the long term.
Thank you so much, Maureen, for that great response. We have some more questions coming in. One of the questions which I thought was absolutely fascinating was the idea of and the threat of cyber attacks, and especially like what are the risks associated if one experiences cyber attacks to biosafety security data sites. So maybe Maureen, if you want, you can respond to that. And also there are some questions on how do you really promote awareness and raise the profile of the IFBA in awareness setting agenda.
So information security is one of the key pillars of a good biosecurity program. In addition to looking at the human element and the physical security, we do look at information security. In addition to research results and other types of information that you want to secure, sometimes the information that you have directly relates to biosecurity. So a key component of a good biosecurity program is to have an inventory of all of the biological agents in your laboratory. And you may also have an SOP or a standard operating procedure that says where these pathogens are kept, in which room. That type of information is something that you want to make sure is well secured, that you're only sharing it with your lab supervisor, for example, that has a password protection on it. You want to make sure that any type of documentation outlining what pathogens you have, where they are in your facility, all of that type of information needs to be carefully secured. So there are a number of different recommendations for information security with respect to a good biosecurity program. I think your second question was about awareness raising with the IFBA. So we really work, as I said, with our member biosafety associations. These are national professional associations in each country. For example, Nigeria, Mali, Ivory Coast, Senegal, Kenya, I could go on, but there's a lot of national biosafety associations in Africa. And the idea is that they are a community of professionals working together and sharing lessons learned within their country, but also regionally, and promoting awareness of biosafety, biosecurity issues. And it brings together government, non-government, private industry, security, defense, agriculture, health. All of these individuals can come together within their association and talk about these issues and work together in terms of raising awareness. If you're interested in your biosafety association in your particular country, we have a list of them on our website, or I'd be happy to put you in touch with your particular association should one happen to be in your country.
Thank you, Maureen. We have some questions for Hubert, but I see Linda has been able to join us. So Linda, if you go ahead and ask your question on personal negligence to Maureen that you had, that would be great. Linda.
All right. Thank you for the opportunity. I was just wondering, with the issue of COVID-19 pandemic, whether it's negligence on the part of our security personnel in terms of the chemical or biological weapons. Based on your expertise, what do you think caused it such that it became a pandemic? If really our security personnel are following the regulations that they've been asked to follow. Thank you.
Yes, so the COVID-19 pandemic is a natural event. It's not an event that was released or deliberately released from any kind of laboratory facility. Individuals within the community around the world are working very hard to implement biosecurity and biosafety practices. As you can see, there have been a number of infections in healthcare workers and individuals working with these agents, but they are certainly doing their best to work with them in a safe and secure manner. And I'm not aware of any biological security incidents related to the event, other than a few reports in the media that we've seen of trucks carrying samples being hijacked, but it probably, I'm just guessing, it may be that that was coincidence, that those samples happened to be on those particular units that were being transported at the time. But generally speaking, I think we can say that this was not a biological security event that led to the pandemic.
Thank you so much, Maureen. I would like to go to Mr. Hubert for a question. We have a question which asks about, with the conversion of from HEU to LEU in most reactors, how has the safety and security issues regarding nuclear security can be addressed, and what are some of the possible problems with LEU?
Thank you, Sylvia. I think that is somehow related to the previous question that I just responded to. But to emphasize, I think a number of the studies that are conducted are focused on addressing both the safety aspects of the reactor and the people who are working there before that decision or that determination can be made to move forward to conversion. But I think where there has been a bit of resistance for conversion has been in instances where the reactor is used maybe for the production of radioisotopes. And perhaps the operator believes that, or they have some technical evidence that using LEU might lower the quality of their product, which will make them less competitive in the global market, or that it will increase the cost of operating the reactor or the facility. But in a study that was conducted back in 2012, I don't think there was really any evidence that would suggest any such situation that will hamper. And I think in most cases, especially countries in Africa where conversion has been carried out, both the safety and the neutronics study analysis have been very impactful. Just for the sake of the audience to know that a typical situation in the case of Ghana and Nigeria is that their reactors are used for neutron analysis, which are mainly for education. So some of the parameters that will have to come into play will be looking at how many students are able to use that reactor, or from their experience, we're using it in the course of a year. And what is the quantity of isotope shortwave isotope that we produced? And if their study shows that there is no significant change using LEU instead of HEU, then that provides justification from a technical perspective that it will not impact the outcome of the conversion process itself. So in a nutshell, I think those will be some of the issues that will be looked at. But this is not just all of them. There are many factors that come into play, but I just want to highlight those that we can easily relate with. Thank you.
Thank you again for that very comprehensive response. I think we have time for maybe one more round of questions. Is that correct, Margarita? I think we do have some time.
Yeah, let's just have one more round of questions so we could wrap up. Thank you.
Yes, I think that would be great. So like participants, please type in your questions and ask our panelists. But before that, like I was wondering, and like my question is to both Maureen and Hubert. We've really see how the global pandemic and 2020 really put pressures on existing architectures of security architectures, and like there has been so much of strain in terms of adapting. So like in your presentations and also the presentations that we heard earlier, we've seen how different organizations have adapted and changed approaches to the new normal that we are living in. So I was wondering if you can reflect and provide some thoughts on what we know about the challenges, but has 2020 afforded some new opportunities in terms of cooperating on non-proliferation efforts, both on nuclear security issues and also on biosecurity and safety issues? And so what are some of those new opportunities? Because I think one of the things that the global pandemic has taught us, and has underscored some of the challenges are so transnational in nature. So it would be great to also reflect on some of the opportunities. Over to you, Hubert, first, and then we can go to Maureen.
Yeah. Certainly, there is impact as a result of the pandemic, and I think some will be for good and some will be for bad. So let me start with the good one first. I think we have been forced to have to develop a thinking and approach of living to meet up with the reality, which is very typical when it comes to security environment. Challenges, we are, as human beings, have been accustomed to adapting to the challenges that emerges as we live and as we evolve. So with the pandemic as well, we have been able to adapt in that light. Not just in the context that uh, we have become more familiar and getting to use virtual systems or technology for our daily work and our activities, but we are also being exposed to threats because with more people now hooked up on the net and using technology, and it's a learning curve for many, sometimes even in decision-making positions, it creates vulnerabilities that enemies can take advantage of. And I think we have listened, we have heard reports highlighting that there's a high increase in the number of hackers around the world trying to take advantage of the volume of people who have switched now to using technology for their work. So certainly, like Maureen earlier mentioned with respect to information technology, I think we again see that there's a rapid increase in the use of information technology, which therefore comes alongside with with a need to be prudent and to adopt those measures that will ensure that the information that is used and then the technologies that are used, some of which are not standard nuclear or radiological technologies, that they are protected from outsiders from getting access to them and turning them into malicious, into negative use. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. One of the biggest things that we've seen in the biological field is this issue of risk assessment and making sure that the solutions in each laboratory are based on the resources and the risks that present in each particular scenario. So a lot of our community has really been looking at how do I solve this problem in my laboratory in terms of PPE or disinfection, or what kind of biosecurity measures should I be putting in place? We know that these solutions need to be local, they need to be individualized in each particular laboratory. So we have to adapt our thinking away from an international standard on how to deal with these microorganisms, but rather to implementing a risk-based approach where each solution is identified uniquely in each laboratory, depending on what the situation is in their laboratory and what their particular risks are. And in fact, the World Health Organization Biosafety Group has just released its revised international guidelines on biosafety and biosecurity. And no longer do we see things like a biosafety level 1, 2, 3, or 4 laboratory. All of those have been gone. And now the new approach is this risk-based approach, where one really looks at your own situation and using sort of a shopping list of measures decides what to apply in your facility. So they just released those new guidelines about 2 weeks ago. No longer do you see classification based on the biosafety levels from 1 to 4. Now it is a completely local risk-based approach. And I think that that's one thing that came out of this pandemic, that we need to be approaching things locally in order to be able to come up with solutions that are practical and sustainable.
Thank you so much, Maureen. I think in both of your remarks, this idea of identifying vulnerabilities and then like putting forward and putting forth a more risk-based approach is something that comes out through both your remarks. I think we have time for just one last question, which has just come in, and it is for Maureen, and maybe okay, I think both the panelists probably can take a dive on this question, and it essentially asks, is there an insurance policy provided to cover damages on accidental release of WMD, or for the people that use them for more peaceful motives? I think either of the panelists, if you want, can take this question.
Yeah, I would like to go first. Could you just repeat the question again? Let me get it clearly.
So the question essentially is asking that whether there is an insurance policy provided to cover damages on accidental release of these weapons. So I think like what the person is trying to convey is like, like, you know, how does one distinguish between deliberate intentional use vis-a-vis a more accidental use of WMD, and what are, and hence if it is a more accidental use, then what are some of the like ways one can be covered essentially? So the distinguishing factor between intentional use and accidental use.
Okay. Yes, I think the issue of insurance, which is much more framed in the form of liability, which is also one of the international agreement for nuclear security under the within the nuclear security framework. And I think a lot of countries in Africa, especially those even pursuing nuclear power program, haven't yet signed up to. I think to the best of my understanding, I think insurance is something which is far-fetched away within the nuclear community because of the high cost that is associated with it. I think there's a study that Nuclear Threat Initiative conducted a couple of years ago, and it was estimated that just in the case of a nuclear accident, it could cause, insurance could be in the tune of billions of dollars. So which is something extremely significant, and which is still in the early stage and discussion stage to see how that can attract international attention and possibly filter into the decision-making process. But just to give you a better sense of what this entails, let's take, for example, the recent incident that happened in Washington University, where a radioisotope got stuck in the facility, and within 1 year, they have spent close to $60 million just for cleanup purposes, evacuate and then clean up and so forth. So when you get that kind of amount of money, I mean, it's quite significant when it comes to putting it in terms of insurance, and for insurance writers to be able to take on them. So it's certainly something which require more conversation, more discussion, and hopefully look towards it in the future. But to be a little bit looking at the side of the non-state deliberate and accidental use, yes, I think accidental use will be considered within the liability convention, even the C convention as well. But in case of deliberate use, I think the CPPNM is what actually provides for requirement for member states to follow, to track down the perpetrator and bring the perpetrator to justice. And even if the perpetrator crosses borders within the CPPNM and Amendment Convention, that perpetrator can be extradited and then pursued, judged accordingly. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Hubert, for explaining that so well, and also alluding to the Nuclear Threat Initiative study. That is very helpful. We have one last question for Maureen, and it is about like what are some of the security challenges facing when one is shipping biological materials which are of dual use nature?
Yes, so there are strict protocols to be followed when you are shipping infectious materials related to labeling, packaging, and documentation that is required for that. One of the things that we did do, it was many years ago now, we worked with the ICAO Technical Committee, who are the ones that write the rules for shipping these materials. And for example, it used to be a requirement that you'd have to put the name of the microorganism on the outside of the package that's being transported, such that individuals, if something were to go wrong, would be able to respond accordingly if there was an emergency or an accident. But it was felt that this was then sort of an advertisement that this particular box might contain an anthrax sample or an Ebola sample. So that requirement for the technical name on the outside of the package, for example, was removed in the regulations to try and provide some anonymity in terms of the specific agent that was in the box. But at the same time, it was required that an individual had to put the name of the risk group of the pathogen. This is a risk group 4 pathogen, meaning highly contagious, highly infectious. We need to be particularly careful if there's an accident with this package. So the committee that is responsible for developing these regulations very carefully looks at these issues of shipment and dual use and trying to balance the information and the requirements between the need for biosafety and the need for biosecurity.
Thank you. With that, I think we've come to a close of the session. It was a really enriching discussion, and one of the things that was one of my great takeaways from the panel discussion is we understand the evolving threats and nature of CBRN issues, and whilst all the different threats of chem, bio, radiological, and nuclear are so different and diverse, and require possibly different and unique approaches and strategies and solutions, but there is a sense of commonality which essentially guides our actions, and that stems from our global desire to essentially bolster and strengthen efforts against the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. And towards this extent, I think like there are some wonderful organizations that are at the forefront of doing great work, CNS being one, which has so much focused on training the next gen experts on non-proliferation and arms control issues. With that, I would conclude, and I see on the chat link there is a virtual Serengeti break, which I'm really looking forward to joining. And over to you, Margarita.